capitalization here in HUD headquarters. Thanks for joining our webinar this afternoon. It's HUD's CNA e-tool for RAD transactions. It's a Q&A session. So we did a training on December 7th on sort of for targeted really for PHAs and their partners on how to submit the requirements around submitting the new e-tool. And what we wanted to do was give people a few weeks to play around with the tool, and then we would do this Q&A session today. So we have a couple prepared slides, which we'll go through in a few minutes, but then after that we will just sort of open the mic and take questions. Before we sort of proceed, let me just also just remind everybody that for all RAD 1 and RAD 2 transactions, that HUD's new CNA Capital Needs Assessment e-tool is required for all financing plan submissions beginning February 1st and onward. So it will be sort of the new lay of the land very shortly. So with that, we'll just go to the next slide. Andy Day from our ICF team. Andy, you want to talk through the webinar logistics?
Sure. A couple of things to know about the webinar tool that we're using. As Greg said, this is a Q&A session. I see we already have one question submitted, which is great. If you have a question for the panel, use the Q&A function and just type it in, and we'll queue them up and walk through those. If you have a technology issue, something's not working with the webinar tool itself, use the chat function, and you can go one-on-one with the host, and Michael will help you troubleshoot what issues you're having with the technology so that you can fully participate in the webinar itself. We are recording this, and we'll make it available to participants after the fact. So,
thanks, Andy. Yep. Go to the next slide. So in addition to myself and Andy, we also have Robert Robinson here with me from our Federal Practice Group, which is our financial analyst, or one of our business system partners for helping support the RAD program. Okay. All right, so as I mentioned in earlier December, we already had a prior session. We did an overview of the CNA e-tool, and again, this is for non-FHA transactions. FHA transactions have been required to use the e-tool since November 1st, yep. Right? So since November 1st, and it's only RAD transactions where you have a non-FHA transactions where the implementation is February 1. So we want to share some pointers from our reviewer training from a couple weeks ago. We're going to do an open Q&A, and as Andy said, we're going to tape this so that people who weren't able to attend or want to go back to it can.
So one of the things that we wanted to remind folks, despite the fact that this is a kind of a Q&A session, it is a follow-on to the previous session that was held December 7th. And just as a reminder, there are lots of needs assessors out there that are familiar with the e-tool, but the focus of these sessions is on how do we handle non-FHA transactions with the new tool. The FHA transactions are going to go through the same process that they're going through today, and I know from some meetings that we've been in that there's going great guns. There are some 100 submissions through the CNA portal, so which is great. So we're looking forward to having RAD kind of join the party. But remember, RAD transactions that use the CNA e-tool are going to be uploaded to the resource desk. You will not use the e-tool submission portal. And also, the Financial Factors tab, which is part of the CNA e-tool, needs to be completed and confirmed before you submit it. So likely the needs assessor will complete that with guidance from the PHA, but the PHA needs to make sure that they have looked at those financial factors. So just a reminder of that. So as Greg mentioned, we did a reviewer training with the recap team here at headquarters, and in doing that, there were a couple of things that we saw that we wanted to make sure that the PHAs and the kind of outside world using the new tool were aware of. First and foremost, unlike an FHA transaction that uses the CNA e-tool, the RAD notice requires green components. And so please, when you're getting your needs assessment completed and your needs assessor is working on it and you're confirming it, please make sure that if you're doing things in rehab that and they're utility consumers, you want to make sure that either Energy Star, WaterSense, or FEMP products that are available are being used. If those products are not available, then an analysis needs to be done with multiple components, 2 or more, to see which one is the more energy efficient. So please make sure that you're doing that. There are places in the eCNA tool for this to be done, so please take advantage of those worksheets.
And Robert, on that, for PHA who may be on the call today, it's really not for them to insert that what they're getting from their assessor has to include
That's correct. That's correct. So as the PHAs, that's a very good point, Greg. As the PHAs are contracting for this work, just remind the needs assessors that this is a RAD requirement. Another thing to remember for non-FHA transactions, that the utility consumption baseline is still a required component of the RAD CNA or RAD PCA. So whether you use the utility consumption baseline worksheets in the existing RPCA tool, or you use EPA Portfolio Manager's SEDI process and output, or another acceptable format, the consumption at the current property needs to be captured for RAD submissions. So please don't forget to complete those utility usage worksheets. Also, like the RPCA tool before it, the eCNA tool wants all components of the property to be included in the analysis. So even if you're not replacing an item in the next 20 years, that doesn't mean that it doesn't need to be included on the tool. For example, if you just replace the roofs at your property and you put in a 25-year guaranteed roof, you still need to list the roof, and you need to still list when it was installed and all of those various items. There's no exclusion from that. There's also no exclusion from those components that are sometimes paid for out of operations. There are a lot of PHAs that have been stretched from a capital funding standpoint. We recognize that. They've been using operating funds to pay for things and putting in new refrigerators at unit turnover and those sorts of things. That doesn't mean that the items shouldn't be listed in the eCNA tool, so please make sure that those items are being listed. Also, an energy audit. Energy audit has to be done for a RAD PCA, and an energy audit is going to hopefully provide some recommendations that informs the PCA and the decisions that the PHA is making in replacing various items. That analysis and that evaluation should be included in the eCNA tool. Again, much like the analysis of a more energy efficient component that I spoke about before, this is the same sort of thing. If an energy audit suggests that a 17-SEER air handler is a better approach from an air conditioning standpoint, please make sure that that's included in the eCNA tool with the alternate version, the 15-SEER, for example. Okay? And to help the recap team here who's going to be reviewing these, it would be very helpful if in the name of the component that is being selected for replacement, if you used something along the lines of Energy Star or provided a little bit of efficiency. The examples in the slide, 1.6-gallon toilets, just so that the reviewer can see quickly that the required component has been selected. If simply typing in refrigerator, then the reviewer is going to need to go back and take a look at that specific component in the tool to verify that it is in fact Energy Star. So try and reference those in the names of the components that are being replaced. And lastly, just as a reminder, RAD reviewers are not making changes to the eCNA tools. So to the extent that they come back with comments for you to take back to your needs assessor, unlike I know some transaction managers have been very helpful and are very well versed in the RPCA tool and providing some assistance in updating that tool, that level of sophistication is not going to exist in this tool. The PCA contractors, the needs assessors themselves are going to need to be involved in making those updates and changes for the PHA, verifying that information, and then resubmitting it. So your transaction managers are no longer going to be able to make those sorts of corrections for you. So just remember that as you're going through. Okay? So those were the main items that we wanted to talk about, just kind of to set the stage. So Andy and Scott, what sort of questions do we have for Greg and I?
Looks like you have 4 of them, so folks can submit at any time. First one, somebody's been following the news, and the question is, are RAD units affected by a government shutdown?
So if there's a shutdown, hopefully it would be very temporary. If there's a shutdown, we're not working, so we're not handling any transactions. But if the shutdown were in any way to go past February 1st, then whenever the PHAs finally submit, you would be required to submit under the new e-tool. So still, the February 1st date doesn't change.
Okay. So this is Scott. I'll chime in with the next question that's come in. Would you speak to the ASCE 4113 standard for seismic evaluation and retrofit of existing buildings? What are other relevant laws and regulations related to seismic-related work for RAD conversion?
Right, so seismic studies are required in certain zones throughout the country, and RECAP's position on that, and I believe FHA's position on that, is that there's kind of a standard pool of where those are required, particularly in California, and those are evaluated kind of on a case-by-case basis. So I would work with your transaction manager to confirm what additional studies are required. I know that a general seismic study is required, but I'm not entirely sure what specifics there are around those, but I do know that we have some resources available to find out for sure. So if in a seismic zone, do that. So Andy, go ahead.
Yeah, Robert, this is Andy. I was going to say, in the user guide for the e-tool, there's some guidance on seismic standards and how to get more information about what might apply given the type of construction and where you are in the country. I think they begin that description, kind of a quick overview of what the standards are, starts on about page 45 of the e-tool user guide.
Excellent, great, thank you, Andy.
And I think there's a follow-up one, yeah. Go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, sticking with the seismic theme here, what's the time frame for completing seismic-related work if needed after RAD conversion?
Well, it wouldn't be after RAD conversion. I mean, if you're doing a seismic study as part of the RAD conversion, you're submitting it prior to. So I'm
assuming the question is, if there's something, if the study shows that work needs to be done, then what's the requirement from there?
Yeah, so, that's how I'm reading it. It's completing seismic-related work.
Yeah, so I'm imagining that the seismic studies would be required in a new construction or some sort of rehab, certain level of rehab. Yeah. And I would imagine that would be required to be completed during the construction period. Right. So we can certainly check and see, but I've not run into a case where a seismic study was required when no rehab was being done. But that may be the case. In those cases, there may be some remediation. So we'll double check on that. But I think my reading of the way this question is framed is if there's work being done already and the seismic study says they need to do some additional things, that would be done as part of construction. Does that make sense, Andy?
Yes, it does.
Yep.
And if we didn't nail your question, just submit a follow-up and we'll try to get it.
Exactly. So shifting gears to energy audits here. So to confirm, energy audits were not required before the eCNA tool was released, and it will be required after February 1st with using the eCNA tool.
That's actually not correct. Energy audit has always been a part of the RAD PCA scope of work. So the energy audits will continue to be required as part of the new eCNA tool. So I think maybe the distinction's being made that for an FHA transaction, an energy audit's not required, and that's still the case. So for non-FHA, again, the focus of this conversation is around non-FHA RAD conversions, and those are required. and have been for the life of the RAD program.
Okay, so I think we've hit the questions we have in the queue. Just a reminder to folks to please use the Q&A function. If you have any follow-up questions, any questions about other topics.
Yeah, and then while we're kind of waiting for any other questions that might come in, these questions have raised something that I do think RECAP wants to stress, which is as the transition to the new eCNA tool occurs, PHAs should definitely feel free to reach out to their transaction managers and make sure that they're getting the various pieces. And if there's any confusion in the industry from the needs assessors or anybody else, contact their transaction manager, and the headquarters staff will be more than happy to kind of step in and help wherever possible. So RECAP has spent a lot of time preparing for this and hoping to make this a fairly easy transition over to the eCNA tool. Again, there's always been a tool required in the RAD program. The RPCA tool was always required, and so this is just really a different tool, same sorts of questions, same sorts of information being gathered. So it shouldn't be that heavy a lift for folks to move over. Well, this may be a shorter call than we anticipated.
All right. We have a new one pop in here.
Okay, good.
Thanks, Jake. Can you explain the main differences between pre and post eCNA eTool process?
Well, we spent a fair amount of time in the December 7th presentation going through the significant differences between the two. There are just not that many, but so from a processing standpoint, prior to the CNA eTool, all of the RPCA components were required to be uploaded to the RAD resource desk, and now what's going to be replaced with that will be the actual eCNA tool and all of its various pieces. So the eCNA tool is made up of the assessment tool. There's a flags report that has to be submitted with responses to the warning flags. No severe flags can be present in the tool when it's submitted. There's an assessment summary report that needs to be submitted that's produced through the validation engine on the web. And then all of the various narrative pictures, energy audit, utility consumption baselines, those pieces are unchanged. So from a RAD perspective, RECAP feels like that the scope of work for these eCNAs or RPCAs or whatever term of art you're using is not changing. It's just a matter of kind of how this information is being delivered. And the new delivery mechanism will be through this eCNA tool.
Right, and for process, the process really doesn't change much at all, because in the past, a PHA would upload to the resource desk its RPCA. Well, it's going to upload a new CNA tool. So that's the same. The only sort of real difference in that is that before the PHA or its development partner submits the new e-tool, it goes out and validates it through HUD's validation engine, and therefore then when it comes in, we're going to also validate it just to make sure our validation is the same as your validation. But otherwise, there's the normal back and forth between the transaction manager and the PHA over the scope of work and the 20-year schedule and all that stuff. And when it's all said and done and there's agreement between the PHA and the TM, then if there's changes, then the PHA will go back and amend the e-tool and then send it back to us. Right. So really the process isn't that much different. The tool itself is a little different.
Yeah. Okay. So we have a little bit of follow-up on the government shutdown question. Just want to be clear. PHAs that have RAD units will receive subsidy if there is a government shutdown?
Yeah, so those funds should already have been locked in. So let me just say, I apologize, I just wasn't ready for that question for this seminar. And it's a very legitimate question, but let me check with our team and we'll get a more complete answer on what happens with properties that have converted after a shutdown. It's just like any other multifamily property, what happens with a shutdown, and I just don't have that.
I mean, there might not, if it's a PBRA, for example, might not be somebody around to process the voucher. If it's PBV, the PHA administrators already received their pot of money. They're not affected by the shutdown. So we'll double check that.
Andy, what's the best way for someone who's raised this question, but there may be others in the audience who want to know the answer? When we find this out, how will we get this?
My thinking is we usually will send a follow-up email to folks once we have the recording available, so we could provide guidance in that follow-up email.
Okay.
I guess assuming that you're there on Monday. Yeah, but we can get it out. You know, if we wanted to just get a quick follow-up Q&A, I know it's a time-sensitive question. We can send a follow-up to all participants. You know, whenever we have it ready.
Yep. Okay. On seismic again, could the seismic evaluation trigger a requirement to perform rehab in order to complete the RAD conversion?
I do think that's possible. It's more likely that the seismic evaluation would trigger additional work on top of the rehab that's already anticipated. I'm not entirely sure if a seismic evaluation rises to the level of an environmental condition that has to be remediated just through the conversion. We'll have to check on that. I'm not sure that simply being on a fault line or whatever a result is, you have to do some sort of retrofit. I don't think that's the case, but we'll find out. We'll follow up on that one.
Okay, I think we've gone through the questions we have in the queue. We'll just do another reminder out there. If you have any other questions mulling about, feel free to put them in the Q&A box.
And if you think of a question once we close down, send it to what, RAD Resource Desk?
Yeah, send it to RAD Resource Desk, yeah. I know there was one question that came through the eCNA tool question and answer portal about whether the eCNA tool was going to be required for CNAs in public housing. And I just wanted to make sure that everyone's aware that that is not the case. Public housing has not embraced the eCNA tool at this point. So it's only post-conversion that the eCNA tool will be kind of required. So in conversion and then post-conversion as an asset management tool. So anything that's in public housing today and staying in public housing would not be using the eCNA tool.
Okay, I guess we people are comfortable. Okay. Again, if you have more questions, send it to RAD Resource Desk, and we'll follow up on some of the seismic questions and the shutdown questions and try to get those answers out to everybody on the webinar as quickly as we can. And otherwise, thanks for everyone being part of this webinar, and we look forward to your new submissions come February 1. Thank you.